Before we begin, a quick warning. Tennessee True Crime contains detailed descriptions and images of real-life violence. Some listeners and viewers may find the material deeply disturbing. This content is intended for mature audiences only. And remember, the goal of sharing these stories is not to sensationalize tragedy, but to honor the victims, understand the truth, and give voice to those who can no longer speak for themselves. Listener discretion is strongly advised. On the night of January 8, 1994, residents of the Foot Homes public housing development were startled awake by the sound of a gunshot. It was close to 11 o'clock, and even in a neighborhood used to sirens and shouting, that single, sharp crack was enough to pull people to their windows and out onto their porches. When they stepped outside, they found a man lying in the street in front of 596 South Lauderdale Street. 43-year-old Hallie Ralph Cox, a painter by trade, dressed in his work clothes, lay motionless. He'd been shot once in the head. Tonight's story takes us to Memphis, a city with deep soul, rich history, and a shadowed past marked by violence that sometimes feels too heavy to carry. This one is one of those stories. It begins with a single gunshot in the cold night air and ends with one of the most horrific crimes the city of Memphis has ever seen. A case that would haunt even the most hardened detectives and leave a family and a community shattered forever. This is the story of the Leicester Street Massacres.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee. True crime.
They say the South never forgets, and Tennessee, she remembers everything. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows of the volunteer state's past meet the stories that refuse to be forgotten. I'm your host, Tiffany Morgan. Each week, we dig into twisted tales of betrayal, violence, and mystery, the ones where whispers carry truth, and the answers are never as simple as they seem. Let's step into the dark and piece together the clues, because in Tennessee, some secrets still haunt the hills. This is Tennessee True Crime. So, at the time, much like it is now, who are we kidding, Memphis was already on edge. 9 people had been killed in the first 9 days of that year. But detectives had no clear suspect, no motive, and no weapon for this murder of Hallie Ralph Cox. For months, Cox's murder would remain unsolved. Yet another tragedy in a city that was much too used to tragedy. But the answer, when it came, would reveal the beginning of a pattern, one that wouldn't truly be understood until more than a decade later. In May of 1994, police received a tip that led them to 19-year-old Jesse Dodson, a name that was already familiar to them. Jesse had grown up just a few blocks away at 600 Lauderdale Street, in a home that police had visited more than once. His childhood was defined by instability and violence. According to a 2010 report by Memphis journalist Conchi Anthony, Jesse was raised in chaos. His father, Jesse Sr., had been abusive towards his mother. After years of beating, she finally left him. But she wasn't exactly a constant presence after that either. She came and went. At one point, she left home for a church trip and came back with a new boyfriend. Now, Jesse was often left to fend for himself. At school, he was bullied for the clothes that he wore, and he quickly fell behind. He had to repeat the 4th grade 2 times because of poor attendance. And by his teenage years, he was angry, withdrawn, and increasingly violent. Between 1990 and 1992, Jesse was charged 3 separate times for disorderly conduct and once for assault. The first time came when he was just 15. His mother had tried to discipline him for misbehavior, and Jesse responded by threatening her. That's a no for me, and I have a hard time even wrapping my head around my child threatening me, but that's a rant for another time. The police were called out. Now, a month later, a 13-year-old neighbor told his parents that Jesse had punched him in the face and threatened to put him in the hospital if he didn't bring him $25. In 1991, Jesse came home looking to fight his brother Cecil. When his mother tried to lock him in his room, he broke down the door, punched holes in the wall, and told her he was going to kill her. Police officers arrived on the scene then, but they couldn't calm him down either. Now, by December of that year, Jesse had thrown beer bottles into a neighbor's apartment during an argument with her. This was a young man who'd grown up surrounded by violence and now, it seemed, was carrying it out himself. When police traced the 1994 murder of Hallie Cox back to Jesse Dotson, it didn't take long for them to piece together a motive. It was over a drug deal gone wrong. Reports later stated that Cox had bought cocaine from Jesse Dotson, only it wasn't cocaine at all. It was soap shavings. So when Cox realized he'd been scammed, he confronted Dodson, obviously in anger, but Dodson wasn't unarmed. You see, Jesse was an alleged member of what was called the Kitchen Crips, and the confrontation quickly turned deadly. Cox was shot once in the head and left lying in the street. Jesse Dotson was eventually arrested and charged with his murder. In November of 1994, Jesse pled guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 18 years in prison. So for more than a decade, Jesse stayed behind bars, and in that time, the city of Memphis moved on. But time behind bars can change a person. And when Jesse Dotson walked free in 2007, he seemed determined to turn his life around. By August 27th, 2007, Jesse Dotson was paroled. Just 5 months later, on January 26, 2008, his sentence officially expired. No more parole. He was free. And at first, life after prison seemed so good. Jesse had rekindled his relationship with his brother, Cecil Dotson, who welcomed him back into the family. Jesse was living with his sister, Nicole, and even working with his father, Jesse Sr., as a painter, which is ironically the same trade where Hallie Cox had once worked. Jesse was an uncle now and helped with Cecil's 5 children, kids who, by all accounts, adored him. For the first time, Jesse Dotson's life appeared stable. But behind the surface of that peace, there were tensions growing within the family. There were arguments about money, about loyalty, and about Cecil's involvement with the Gangster Disciples, one of Memphis's largest street gangs. Those tensions would come to a violent, unimaginable end on Leicester Street. It started quietly with a phone call that went unanswered.
McMinn.
On March 2nd, 2008, Erica Smith, who was the mother of one of Cecil's 5 children, tried to reach him. She'd spoken to him in the early morning hours, but after that, nothing, no response. Now, by the afternoon, Erica drove to Cecil's house, which was a modest brick home on Lester Street in South Memphis. She noticed that the front door was open and that music was playing inside, but no one came to the door. She called out and got no response. Not from Cecil, not from Marissa, who was Cecil's girlfriend and mother of his other 4 children, and frankly, she left a little uneasy. The next day, Cecil didn't show up for work. No one in the family had heard from him. No one in the family had heard from Marissa. So by March 3rd, Erica was worried enough that she called the police. She told them something was definitely wrong. When the officers arrived, they immediately knew she was right. The smell hit them before they ever crossed the threshold. That heavy metallic scent of blood and the smell of decay. Officer Randall Davis was the first to enter the home. Through the partially open door, he could already see a human foot. When he stepped inside, what he found in that home was beyond comprehension. In the living room, there were 4 adults, all shot dead. The blood beneath them had already dried. It was very clear that they'd been there for some time. Now, those 4 deceased adults were later identified as Cecil Dodson, Marissa Williams, Hollis Seals, and Shindry Robinson. And the deeper officers moved into the house, the worse it got. Cecil had been shot 8 times, once in the head, chest, neck, and right leg, and 4 times in his left leg. He was found kneeling near the couch, still holding a small bag of marijuana in one hand. Marissa Williams had been shot 5 times. In the head, chest, stomach, and both legs. Her body was slumped over another victim's and her legs tangled across the floor. Hollis Seals, who was simply a visitor at Cecil's house, had been shot once in the mouth and twice in the chest. His pants were pulled below his knees and his wallet had been removed. Hollis's girlfriend, Shindry, had been shot 4 times. She was found seated against the sofa, her body partially undressed, pants down, and a small bag of cocaine laid against her privates. And then, one by one, they began finding the children. 2-year-old Cecil II had died from multiple stab wounds to the head. 4-year-old Samario had been beaten and stabbed, suffering blunt trauma and sharp force injuries that punctured his lung. 5-year-old Cedric had his face fractured, his skull bruised and broken. Doctors later said his injuries were consistent with being beaten with wooden boards. 3-month-old Sanaya had a large cut in her scalp that exposed the bone beneath. The right side of her skull was crushed in, an open, depressed skull fracture that had also cut into the covering of her brain. She'd been struck multiple times, and she too had stab wounds. And 9-year-old CJ, the oldest, was found in the bathroom, lying in the bathtub. His throat had been cut, he'd been stabbed in the stomach, and a sawzall blade was lodged in his head. That's 4 adults and 5 children. 9 victims total. The level of violence and the chaos and the brutality was overwhelming. Seasoned investigators who thought they had seen everything just stood there in silence. Sergeant Tony Mullins, a homicide expert, called it the worst crime scene that he'd ever seen. He said, quote, "There are no words to describe the evil that has happened in that house," end quote. And yet, somewhere within all that savagery, there were still faint signs of life. And when I read this case, my jaw hit the floor when I found out that anybody made it out of this. Even after remaining in that house of horrors for 2 days, there were 3 small children fighting to survive. When the initial shock began to settle, the investigation obviously intensified. Memphis homicide detectives immediately recognized this wasn't a random act of violence. It was deliberate, intentional. The brutality and the closeness of the attacks, the sheer rage behind every wound, it was meant to send a message. Now, detectives began the difficult task of piecing together what had happened inside that home on Leicester Street. Blood patterns showed that the killer or killers moved methodically from room to room. The knife had been wielded with precision, but also with fury. It wasn't just murder, this was total annihilation. Officers recovered shell casings from 2 different guns, a 9mm and a .380 caliber. But the weapons themselves were gone. Whoever did this had tried to clean up, even collecting those shell casings and placing them inside of a Ziploc bag, but they found them hidden beneath a jacket. They'd forgotten to take them with them. At first, investigators looked at the father of the slain children, Cecil Dotson Sr. Some wondered if the father himself could have turned violent, but that theory quickly dissolved because Cecil Sr. was among the dead, and he'd been stabbed and shot multiple times. So they quickly decided he wasn't the suspect, just simply a victim too. So the question remained, who could have done this to an entire family? The surviving members of the Dotson family, Jesse and his sister Nicole, and one of Cecil's older children that was not there at the time of the murder, thank God, arrived at the scene. They were horrified and afraid. They were all placed in protective custody along with other family members. Police were desperate for leads and began questioning everyone. Now, Jesse, who had rekindled his relationship with his brother, came willingly to the station wanting to help. He told detectives that his brother Cecil was unfortunately part of those gangster disciples, and that gang did not tolerate disloyalty. Apparently, Cecil had recently angered another member after slapping his child's mother, Erica Smith, in front of that member and his girlfriend. The woman called the police, and when officers arrived, Cecil had allegedly snitched on them, telling them about drugs in the house. Now, in gang culture, that was unforgivable. You don't talk to the police. Jesse told police that Cecil had been written up for a violation in the gang. That member was known as Doc Holliday, but Cecil had refused to attend a disciplinary meeting, which was the norm when things needed to be hashed out. Now, according to one former gangster disciple, that could trigger what they called a DV, which means a death violation. And sometimes when they didn't feel that a DV was enough, it could lead to what they called a blackout, which was a total extermination order, meaning the entire family. Meanwhile, at Le Bonheur Children's Hospital, the 3 surviving children, 9-year-old Cecil Jr., 5-year-old Cedric, and 2-year-old Sanaya, clung to life. They had endured unimaginable horror. Detectives were desperate to speak to them, hoping for even a small clue. Days passed, leads went nowhere. But then on March 7th, 2008, 5 days after the murders, something miraculous happened. 9-year-old CJ Dotson, who had been found nearly dead in that bathtub, blades sticking out of his head, opened his eyes. He was alive, and he could speak. Detectives rushed to his hospital bedside. Deputy Director Armstrong decided to have an officer attempt to speak to CJ early in the investigation because of the possibility that CJ may still die. The police considered CJ very important to this investigation because he was familiar with all of his father's associates. On March 5th, 2 days after they had undergone surgery, then Sergeant Caroline Mason of the Homicide Bureau was assigned to Le Bonheur Children's Hospital and instructed to assess the surviving children, including CJ, and determine what information they could provide. So she attempted to interview CJ that same day, but she found him in and out of consciousness, cursing, talking crazy, and screaming out names including Cassandra and Roderick. Officers investigated CJ's statements and learned that Marissa, one of the deceased adults, had a sister named Cassandra. But after further investigation, they concluded that she was obviously not involved in the crimes. Lieutenant Davidson said that the officers continued to investigate any of CJ's statements that they thought made sense. Now, eventually, CJ, still bandaged and still bruised, became stronger, and police felt they could continue on with questioning. And it was then that he told investigators something shocking. He had a different story this time, and he said that he could tell them more about the person that had hurt them. CJ said, "I was watching TV in my sister's room when I heard a gunshot. I came out into the hallway and I saw someone point a gun at my daddy. Then I saw smoke and sparks." Now, when he told them, it sent chills through the room. CJ said that it was none other than his Uncle Jesse. Now, Jesse Dotson, Cecil's older brother, had been at the house the night before the murders. The brothers reportedly argued. Witnesses recalled seeing Jesse leaving the home late that night, but until that moment, there was no reason to suspect him of anything more than a family dispute. So police quickly put out an alert, and just hours later, they found Jesse, calm, collected, and seemingly unaware that his name had surfaced in one of the worst mass murders in Memphis history. When detectives brought him in for questioning, Jesse appeared cooperative at first. He denied everything, said he had nothing to do with it. He said he loved his brother and would never hurt his family. But the detectives, seasoned, patient, and quietly determined, they felt like they knew better. They said they'd seen this kind of calm before, and they began the long process of peeling back his story layer by layer. Now, hours turned into nearly a day of questioning. Jesse changed his story multiple times, growing more defensive and inconsistent as it went on. The investigators pushed gently and then firmly, circling back to the same moments and the same questions. Finally, under the weight of evidence and exhaustion, Jesse Dotson broke. When he began to speak, what came out stunned even the most experienced homicide detectives in Memphis. Jesse confessed that he'd gotten into an argument with his brother Cecil on the night of March 2nd, 2008. The argument, according to Jesse, turned violent. Cecil accused him of ruining their family's name, of bringing trouble home. Voices were raised and tempers flared. Jesse, still seething from years of tension, pulled a gun and shot his brother. In that moment, Jesse realized what he had done, but instead of fleeing, he chose something darker, something even harder to comprehend. He decided to eliminate every witness in the house. Jesse went room to room. He shot and stabbed the adults first: Cecil, his girlfriend Marissa Williams, and their friends Hollis Seals and Shindry Robertson. Then, when the house grew eerily quiet except for the cries of the children, he turned his attention to them. The younger children, innocent, terrified, and crying for help, became his final victims. He attacked each one, leaving behind a scene that no words can fully describe. And somehow, 3 of those children survived. When detectives asked Jesse why, he said he thought they were already dead. He believed no one would be left to tell the story. But Cecil Jr. had lived, and he told police everything. When the details of Jesse's confession became public, Memphis was overcome with disbelief and anger. The idea that a man could murder his own family, including young, innocent children, tore through the community like wildfire. The city mourned for the victims, for Cecil, Marissa, Hollis, Shindry, and for those small, innocent children who had suffered the unthinkable. In the months that followed, the surviving children slowly began to heal, physically and emotionally. Their recovery became a symbol of resilience for Memphis, but they would carry the scars of that night for the rest of their lives. Jesse Dotson was charged with 6 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder. His trial began September 2010, 2.5 years after the crime. The courtroom was filled every day with family members, reporters, and citizens, and they all sat in silent horror as prosecutors played Jesse Dotson's taped confession, his calm voice describing the brutal acts in detail. The defense tried to argue that the confession was coerced, that Jesse was under stress. And of course, if you listen to the last case, you know that confessions are not always that simple. So when Jesse got to court, he explained why he had confessed and what they had done that night that could possibly be corroborated. So Jesse testified that the group had been out and about that evening. They'd gone to several apartment complexes and eventually bought $45 worth of weed. Cecil had been visiting with multiple people and ended up telling Jesse that he wanted to introduce him to, quote, his folks. Now, according to Jesse, this term referred to the members of the Gangster Disciples. Jesse testified that 4 people were inside that apartment, and Jesse and Cecil stayed there for only about 5 minutes. As they were leaving, they ran into Cecil's baby mama, Erica. Cecil talked to her while Jesse went on to the car, and after they talked for a while, Cecil came back to the car and they all left. After leaving, Jesse was able to tell the court that Cecil had talked to her on the phone while they were driving to another person's apartment. When they got to that person's home, they stayed for 30 or 45 minutes before they returned to Cecil's house. Now, according to Jesse, when they got back to Cecil's house, himself, Cecil, Hollis, Marissa, and Shindry were all together in the living room. Marissa was drinking a wine cooler, and Shindry was preparing a marijuana cigarette. Cecil asked Marissa to put clean sheets on the bed in the master bedroom. Their friend Hollis had just been released from jail, and Cecil planned to let Hollis and Shindry stay in their bedroom for the night. Jesse said that he volunteered to change the sheets and that he was in the master bedroom with a quilt in his hand when he heard 2 or 3 gunshots. The defendant acknowledged that he was carrying a blue .44 caliber handgun at the time, but when he heard screaming, he hid beneath the bed. He claimed to have heard only a few shots at first, followed by more shots just seconds later. Jesse said that he did not know whether the shots were fired from the same gun or different guns. He said that he remained hidden beneath the bed for several minutes because he heard other noises, which he later realized were from the family dog. But in his state of fear, he initially believed it was someone walking around in the bedroom where he was hiding. Jesse said that he was unable to hear what was going on in other areas of the home, so he eventually left his hiding place and went into the living room. The defendant said that he discovered the victims' bodies and believed that everyone in the house, including the children, were dead. He said that the front door was open and that he left the house on one of the children's bicycles that he found behind the door in the living room. He had recalled riding the bicycle to someone named Miss Jones's home, where she allowed him to enter. The defendant said that he went immediately into her bathroom and vomited. Jesse admitted that he did not report what he had seen to the police, explaining to them, "Y'all done heard testimony about the gangs. I'm in a gang. We don't call the police. It's just that simple. We don't call the police. It's not part of what we do. If I call the police, I'll be just like my brother." Now, Jesse went on to say that Sergeant Armstrong had threatened him. And Jesse said when his mother came in for him to talk after his confession, he even told her, "They're trying to pin this on me, but I didn't do it." Several witness interviews corroborate that Cecil was in trouble with the gangster disciples and that he was concerned they were going to do something to him. Jesse Sr., their dad, testified that when he learned of the killings, he believed they were gang-related because Cecil had told him he was attempting to leave the gangster disciples and was worried that they might harm him. He had even asked Jesse Sr. to move in with him, explaining that gang members respect the family of other gang members and would be unlikely to harm him if Jesse Sr. was living with him. Now, Jesse Sr. moved in briefly, but Jesse's own brothers said, "You got to get out of there because they will kill you too." And as for CJ's idea of Uncle Jesse, well, CJ also testified at trial that he had told someone in a previous interview that on the same night that the murders happened, a woman named Cassandra knocked on the door and said she needed to use the bathroom. CJ said Cassandra and some other people, including a man wearing a mask with a little bit of blood on it, entered the house. CJ said he'd never seen the man before, but he recalled Cecil referring to the man as Roderick. Now, CJ testified that Roderick said something to Cecil about the gang and also told Cecil, "You got too big, boy." According to CJ, Roderick fired a gun at Cecil and told him, "You'll never stop playing with the gang. You never know what would happen." So, which was it? Was it Uncle Jesse or was it this other story? Was there anything in the master bedroom to corroborate what Jesse said about changing the sheets or having a quilt in his hand? What would you have done in that situation? Gone out firing against an unknown number of people or hid and tried to stay alive? I just don't know what to believe. In addition to Jesse essentially recanting his confession and telling this new story, there's also expert testimony on DNA evidence, and you've got to hear this. So Special Agent James testified on cross-examination that his analysis of Jesse's pants, which were seized following his arrest, revealed only blood matching Jesse. He found no blood of any of the victims on Jesse's clothing. He also did not find Jesse's DNA on the knife blades, the knife handles, the victim's body, the wood boards, the glass, the pillows, the shotgun, the shell casings, or the shoes. He also testified that analysis of the scrapings from Shindry's nails yielded a DNA profile of an unknown female. And the bike he left on from that bloody, gruesome crime scene that he supposedly caused, nothing. There were also no footprints, no fingerprints. Now, to some, this may seem like, okay, that's a few things, but no. 468 exhibits were introduced at trial. Not one was linked to Jesse, not one. This is yet again where I'm scratching my head. Could one man have done all of this? There was a gun in the home, and you're telling me he took down 4 grown adults and nobody fought him? No one tried to defend themselves? No one went for the gun that was right there in the living room? And then he killed all of the children? Why not just kill the ones who could talk and identify him? And in all of this, again, he left behind not a single shred of evidence. I don't know. I always feel like it's super important to look at this as a juror. Now, again, people make false confessions, and he said the police threatened him. What if he was scared of retaliation or that the same would happen to the rest of his family, so he just took the blame? Because in a crime scene with that much brutality, it's hard for me to imagine that there was nothing. The surviving children would go on to testify in court years later, and of course that showed extraordinary courage. They had gone through what no child ever should, but they stood strong, living reminders of what has been lost, but also what endured. On March 2nd, 2010, exactly 2 years after the murders, and despite the lack of DNA evidence, the jury found Jesse Dotson guilty on all counts. A subsequent sentencing hearing resulted in an additional 120-year prison sentence for the assault and injury of the 3 surviving children. All of this combined was also sending a message in a way. There had been no tolerance and no mercy on Jesse. Now, as the verdict was read, the courtroom erupted in tears, some of grief, some of relief, and others simply in disbelief that a family member could possibly be responsible for so much loss. Now, of course, Jesse has filed petitions and appeals. In a recent petition, he claims over the course of the evening that he confessed, Lieutenant Armstrong threatened to arrest his mother and his sister. He threatened to kill Jesse. He threatened to put Jesse in general population with the gangster disciples and let them handle him. He lied to Jesse and told him that they had his footprints in blood at the crime scene. They also allegedly interrogated him for 7 hours while he was sleep deprived and ignored his request for an attorney multiple times. Jesse also said that the lieutenant made promises to him but told him he had to hurry and confess or they would be no good anymore. And then he repeatedly played the tape of CJ saying that Jesse did it. So he broke and he confessed. Now, Jesse Dotson's new filings also argue that CJ's memory had been tampered with by police officers and that he was not in the right state of mind to identify anyone. There are medical records indicating that CJ was on mind-altering medications when he was interviewed, including morphine, propofol, hydrocodone, and fentanyl. And then again, during CJ's first interview, he named 2 separate people and what he had heard them say. But that interview was not completed because the advocate believed that CJ was too distressed to continue. In addition, allegedly, Sergeant Caroline Mason had told CJ about gifts he would receive if he named a suspect, which is in clear violation of protocol. And lastly, Linda Steele, an FBI expert, interviewed CJ 4 days after he spoke with Sergeant Mason, but her report was never disclosed to the defense. CJ's psychologist also said the child's memory was unreliable. There are so many discrepancies, in my opinion. Either way, even now, more than a decade later, the Lester Street murders remain one of the darkest chapters in Memphis history. And when I read through this case, I can't help but still think about those children, the ones who made it out alive and the ones who didn't. Whether or not his memory was correct, the strength and courage it must have taken for CJ to speak up and to face that memory, that's something beyond bravery. That's survival. The Lester Street case is a story about violence, yes, but it's also a story about endurance and community and truth, even when that truth is too terrible to bear. Now, CJ was interviewed in 2024 by Fox 13 Memphis News about his uncle's push to have his murder convictions overturned. CJ said he simply wants to know, why did he do it? What was his purpose and intention? And he says he was a child, so it was so unexpected. He said he also misses his mom and his two brothers, but also says he's so grateful that he survived. CJ says that Jesse deserves to die and have no legal rights. CJ said they should have killed this man. He doesn't need to be free at all. He feels like he should get the same treatment done as what he did to his people. Now, I'm so interested to hear what you guys think of this case. Did Jesse do it? And if you think he did it, did he do it alone? How do we explain the utter lack of evidence? Let me know under our video on the Facebook page, Radio WBMC 97.7. I would love to talk about this with you guys. And if you see me out and about, let's discuss. We will also have case photos up soon, but keep in mind that the photos connected to these episodes are from real cases and can be very graphic in nature. And if you or someone you know is affected by violence or trauma, please know that there are resources to help. You can find crisis support and counseling services that are there for you. Simply dial 988 and press 0 for a crisis counselor in your area. I'm Tiffany Morgan, and this has been another episode of Tennessee True Crime. This episode, The Lester Street Massacres, was written and hosted by me, Tiffany Morgan, and produced by Main Street Media. Background music and theme song by John T. Productions. Research support from Court Archives, A&E, reports by Conchi Anthony, and Action News 5. And if you'd like to sponsor an episode, we would love to partner with you. Our sponsors keep our shows funded and running. To support Tennessee True Crime, stay tuned to be able to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. We are working on getting those socials started, and I'm so excited about that. If you have a case that you're interested in me covering, please feel free to email me at tntruecrime@mainstreetmedia.llc. Join me next week as we uncover another Tennessee case that left a lasting mark. Because here in Tennessee, we never stop telling the stories that matter. And some secrets we refuse to let stay buried. Tune in next time on Tennessee True Crime.
Down through the smoky hollers where the cold wind sighs, footsteps fall where the moonlight hides, whispers over rivers, a secret lost in time. Welcome to Tennessee True Crime. Dark tales in the mountains where the mist won't lie, echoes of the fallen under starless skies. Hear the hush of memory, the voice of the unsaid. This is Tennessee True Crime, where the shadows tread.